That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a sterile pallor over the emergency room entrance. It was just past dawn, and the air carried the sharp tang of antiseptic, mixed with the faint metallic scent of rain-soaked pavement drifting in from the cracked doors. Outside, the city stirred sluggishly under a grey sky, tires hissing on wet asphalt as ambulances idled in the bay. Inside, the hospital's night shift clung to its final hours, nurses moving like shadows between curtained bays, their footsteps muffled on the linoleum. Soft beeps from monitors punctuated the quiet, a rhythmic reminder of lives hanging in fragile balance. In the corner of the waiting area, huddled on a hard plastic chair, sat a girl named Lena. She was 16, though her eyes, dark and shadowed, held the weight of years she shouldn't have known. Her clothes were mismatched and worn, a threadbare hoodie pulled tight over her frame, jeans frayed at the hems from too many nights on the run. Her hair, a tangled curtain of brown, fell across her face, hiding the fresh bruise blooming along her jawline. She hadn't slept, not really. The bus station downtown had been too exposed, the shelters too full of questions she couldn't answer. Escaping the house on the edge of town had taken everything. Slipping out in the dead of night while her stepfather's snores rattled the thin walls, the sting of his last words echoing in her ears. "You're nothing," he'd slurred, his fist connecting before she could duck. But she was nothing no longer. She was free, or as free as a girl with no money, no plan, and a backpack holding only a crumpled photo of her mother could be. Lena kept her head down, fingers tracing the edge of her backpack strap, the worn fabric rough against her skin. The hospital wasn't her destination. It was a momentary refuge, a place where no one would notice her amid the chaos of the early shift change. She watched the world through half-lidded eyes, a janitor pushing a mop in slow arcs, the bucket's wheels squeaking faintly, a doctor in rumpled scrubs sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup, steam curling up like a sigh, families clustered in the corners, their whispers laced with worry. Society saw places like this as beacons of hope, but to Lena it was just another building where the broken came to wait. And she was broken, carrying the guilt of surviving when her mother hadn't, gone 3 years now, taken by the same hands that now hunted her. She pressed her lips together, tasting the salt of unshed tears, her heartbeat a steady thrum against her ribs. She wanted to vanish, to be invisible, but the cold seeped through the glass doors, making her shiver and drawing her deeper into the chair. Across the room, the night shift nurse, Maria, paused at the reception desk. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly a gentle swell beneath her scrubs, the fabric stretched taut over the life she carried with quiet determination. Maria's hands rested instinctively on her abdomen, feeling the subtle kicks that grounded her through the exhaustion. At 32, she'd seen it all in these halls, the overdoses, the accidents, the quiet desperations that unfolded under fluorescent glare. Her shift had been long, starting at midnight with a string of cases that left her feet aching and her mind foggy. But there was a rhythm to it, a purpose in the beeps and the bustle, the way a steady hand could pull someone back from the edge. She adjusted her ID badge, the laminated card clipped to her pocket, its edges worn from countless shifts. The hospital was her world, a place where compassion wore the mask of efficiency, where the staff's toughness hid hearts softened by too many losses. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Lena shifted, her backpack sliding to the floor with a soft thud. She glanced toward the doors as a figure approached, a man, disheveled, his coat dripping water onto the tiles. His eyes were wild, darting like a cornered animal's, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wasn't a patient. There was no limp, no plea in his posture, just anger, raw and unchecked, spilling into the lobby as he shoved past the automatic doors. The air grew heavier, the antiseptic sharpness now undercut by the sour reek of sweat and alcohol. Maria turned at the sound, her brow furrowing, one hand still on her belly as she straightened. "Sir, can I help you?" she called, her voice steady but laced with caution, the kind honed from years of navigating the unpredictable. The man didn't respond. He scanned the room, his gaze locking on Maria, something feral twisting his features. "You," he muttered, voice low and gravelly, stepping closer. The waiting area tensed. A mother pulled her child closer. The janitor froze mid-swipe. Lena's breath caught, her body going still as memories flooded back. The raised voices, the shattering glass, the way her stepfather's rage had always sought the nearest target. This man moved with purpose, his steps deliberate, closing the distance to the desk. Maria backed up slightly, her free hand reaching for the emergency button under the counter. But he was faster, lunging forward with a snarl. "You think you can hide him from me?" He growled, his words slurred, aimed at Maria as if she were the source of his fury. In that frozen moment, the hospital's quiet rhythm shattered. The beeps from the monitors seemed louder, the rain outside a roar. Everyone hesitated. The doctor set down his coffee. The families averted their eyes. The security guard at the far end of the hall still fumbling for his radio. Fear rippled through the air like a chill draft, thick and immobilizing. But Lena, from her shadowed corner, felt it pull at her core. The girl's hands trembled, not from cold now, but from the echo of her own past, screaming for her to act. She couldn't ignore it. Couldn't let this woman, this pregnant stranger, face the storm alone. Her moral wound, that deep scar of guilt for not saving her mother, ignited like a spark in the dim light. Rising slowly, her backpack forgotten on the floor, Lena stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the tension. "Hey!" "Leave her alone." The man's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. Maria's gaze flicked to the teen, surprise widening her features, her hand pausing on the button. The lobby held its breath. The fluorescent hum, the only sound, as the confrontation teetered on the edge. Lena's heart pounded, adrenaline flooding her veins, but she stood her ground, small and overlooked no longer. In that instant, the hospital's misunderstood guardians, the nurses and staff toughened by endless nights, began to stir, their compassion awakening beneath the surface. What no one saw coming was how this runaway girl's quiet heroism would bind them all, turning judgment into a hallway of silent solidarity. The man's snarl twisted into a leer as he turned fully toward Lena, his bulk shifting like a shadow detaching from the wall. Rainwater pooled at his feet, darkening the linoleum in irregular patches that reflected the overhead lights in fractured gleams. The air thickened with his breath, rancid, heated, carrying the faint bitterness of stale beer and unwashed clothes. "What did you say, girl?" he rasped, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the lobby, drowning out the distant patter of rain against the glass. His fists unclenched only to flex again, knuckles whitening, veins bulging like cords under weathered skin. He took a step closer to Lena, ignoring Maria for the moment, his eyes raking over the teen with dismissive contempt, as if she were no more than a fleeting annoyance in his storm of rage. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat that made her vision blur at the edges. She could feel the cool draft from the doors snaking up her spine, chilling the sweat breaking out along her hairline. Her hands, small and trembling, hung at her sides, fingers curling instinctively into the hem of her hoodie. This wasn't her fight. She knew that. She was just a runaway. A ghost slipping through the cracks of a city that didn't care, but the sight of Maria, her face pale, one arm cradling her swollen belly protectively, pulled at something raw inside her. It was the same pull that had frozen her years ago, watching her mother's pleas dissolve into silence under her stepfather's fury. Guilt clawed at her chest, sharp and unrelenting. She hadn't been strong enough then, hadn't spoken up loud enough. Not this time. Swallowing hard, her throat dry as sandpaper, Lena lifted her chin slightly. "I said, leave her alone," she repeated, her voice steadier now, though it cracked on the last word like thin ice underfoot. Maria's eyes widened, a flicker of gratitude mixing with alarm as she pressed the emergency button under the desk, the subtle click lost in the rising tension. The soft beeps from the nearby monitors seemed to accelerate, mirroring the quickening rhythm of her breath. She had faced threats before, agitated relatives, delirium-fueled outbursts, but this felt different, more personal, the man's accusations hanging in the air like smoke. "Please, sir," she interjected, her tone calm yet edged with authority, the voice of someone who had talked down crises in these very halls. "If you're looking for someone, we can help you find them, but not like this." Her free hand hovered near the phone, ready to dial security, while her other remained anchored to her side, shielding the subtle movements of her unborn child. The hospital's night shift fatigue weighed on her, a bone-deep weariness from 12 hours of stitching wounds and soothing fears. But adrenaline sharpened her focus now, turning exhaustion into resolve. The man laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the tiled walls, drawing uneasy glances from the scattered families in the waiting area. A young mother clutched her toddler tighter, the child's wide eyes reflecting the fluorescent glow. An elderly man in the corner shifted his newspaper higher, pretending not to see. The janitor backed away slowly, mop handle clutched like a staff, his face etched with the quiet dread of someone who knew better than to intervene alone. Outside, the rain intensified, sheets of it blurring the world beyond the doors, isolating the lobby in a cocoon of muffled sounds and mounting dread. The attacker advanced on Lena, his shadow stretching long across the floor, engulfing her slight frame. "You think you're tough, kid? Stay out of grown folks' business." He reached out, his hand shooting forward to grab her arm, fingers like iron clamps closing in. Time slowed, the air heavy with the scent of impending violence, sweat, fear, the underlying sterility of the hospital fighting to reclaim its space. Lena dodged instinctively, her body remembering the dodges of home, the narrow escapes from flying objects and bruising grips. She stumbled back against a row of chairs, the plastic creaking under her weight, her backpack spilling open on the floor, the crumpled photo of her mother fluttering out like a fallen leaf. Adrenaline surged through her, hot and electric, chasing away the chill, but it brought fear in its wake, fear not just for herself, but for the life Maria carried, innocent and unseen. Determination hardened in her gut, a quiet fire born from years of silence. She couldn't run now. Running had gotten her here, but it wouldn't save anyone. "Don't touch me," she whispered fiercely, her voice gaining volume as she scrambled to her feet, positioning herself between the man and Maria. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder of the moral chasm she teetered on. Interfere and risk everything she'd fled for, or stand by and let history repeat in a stranger's form. From the hallway beyond the desk, the first stirrings of response echoed. Footsteps, hurried and soft, the swish of scrubs against skin. The hospital staff, often misunderstood as cold bureaucrats in white coats, were anything but. To the outside world, they were faceless figures in a machine of protocols and paperwork, their toughness a barrier against the endless tide of suffering. But in truth, it masked a profound compassion, forged in the quiet hours when they held hands through the final breaths or rocked crying families in empty rooms. Head nurse Elena, a veteran of 20 years with lines etched deep around her eyes from too many night shifts, rounded the corner first. her sensible shoes squeaking faintly on the floor. Behind her, a cluster of doctors and aides emerged from the ER bays, their faces set in grim determination, pages silent for once as they assessed the threat. They moved as one, an unspoken hierarchy activating. Nurses forming the front line, doctors coordinating from behind, the collective fatigue giving way to protective instinct. The man whirled at the sound, his advance faltering as Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din like a scalpel. "Step back, now. You're in a hospital, not a bar fight." Her hands were steady, calloused from years of IV lines and compressions, but her eyes held the weight of lives saved and lost, a silent judgment on the chaos he brought. Maria exhaled shakily, her body sagging slightly against the desk, the baby's kick a reassuring flutter against her palm. Lena stood frozen, breath coming in shallow gasps, the photo at her feet a poignant anchor to her past. The confrontation escalated, the man's rage boiling over as he shoved a chair aside with a clatter, but the staff closed in, their presence a wall of quiet authority. Whispers rippled through the group. "Get security! Call the captain!" as the lobby transformed from a place of waiting into one of guarded solidarity. In that swelling tension, Lena felt the first threads of connection weave through her isolation. The nurses' glances toward her weren't pitying, but appraising, seeing the courage in her trembling stance. Fear gnawed at her edges, guilt whispering that she should flee, but determination held her fast, her moral core refusing to yield. The rain outside pounded relentlessly, a symphony to the unfolding drama, as the hospital's hidden heart began to beat louder, drawing more figures into the fray. What Lena didn't yet know was how her act would unravel deeper truths, binding her to these guardians in ways that would redefine her fractured world. The man's shove sent the chair skidding across the linoleum with a sharp scrape, its legs catching on the edge of a rug and toppling it sideways. The crash reverberated through the lobby, a jarring note that silenced the monitor's beeps for a heartbeat, drawing gasps from the huddled families. Rain lashed the windows harder now, wind whistling through the seals like a warning, carrying the chill deeper into the space. His face contorted, veins throbbing at his temples as he lunged again toward Lena, his arms swinging wide in a wild arc meant to sweep her aside. "Get out of my way," he bellowed, spittle flecking his lips, the words thick with venom that hung in the air like a toxic fog. Lena's instincts fired, her body twisting away just in time, the whoosh of his hand brushing the sleeve of her hoodie. She backed up further, her heels bumping against the fallen backpack, the photo of her mother crinkling underfoot, a soft, heartbreaking sound lost in the chaos. Her breath came in ragged bursts, chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through her, sharpening every sense. The acrid bite of the man's sweat mingling with the hospital's clean sharpness, the cool press of the wall against her shoulder blades, the distant hum of an elevator ding signaling reinforcements. Fear coiled tight in her stomach, a nauseating twist that made her knees weaken. But beneath it burned the unyielding spark of determination. She couldn't let him reach Maria. The nurse's wide eyes, filled with a mix of terror and quiet plea, mirrored the helplessness Lena had seen in her mother's gaze too many times. Guilt surged anew. Not for intervening, but for the years she'd spent silent, shrinking into shadows while the world turned away. This time, her voice rose, raw and unbroken. "Stop! You're scaring everyone! Back off!" Maria pressed herself against the reception desk, her fingers white-knuckled on the edge, the subtle curve of her belly rising and falling with each shallow breath. The baby's movements had stilled, as if sensing the storm, and she fought the urge to curl inward, her training warring with maternal instinct. "Security's coming," she said firmly, though her voice trembled at the edges, the exhaustion of her shift amplifying the vulnerability she rarely showed. Years of night shifts had taught her to project calm, to be the steady hand in the dark, but this threat pierced that armor, stirring a deep-seated fear for the life she nurtured. She glanced at Lena, the teen's small frame a fragile barrier, and felt a pang of compassion twist in her chest. This girl, so young and scarred, stepping into the fray where others hesitated. The hospital's hierarchy stirred around her, aides whispering into phones, a doctor murmuring orders to clear the area, their movements precise, yet laced with the unspoken bond of shared burdens. Head nurse Elena advanced, her presence commanding, despite her unassuming stature, the faint squeak of her shoes, a rhythmic counterpoint to the escalating din. "I said step back," she repeated, her tone like tempered steel, eyes locked on the intruder. Behind her the hallway began to fill, nurses emerging from side rooms, their scrubs whispering as they formed a loose semicircle, stethoscopes dangling like talismans against their chests. Doctors paused mid-stride from the ER, clipboards clutched tightly, their faces etched with the quiet resolve of those who mended the broken daily. The outside world saw them as detached professionals, hardened by protocols and paperwork, but in this moment their toughness peeled back to reveal the raw humanity beneath. The compassion that had kept them going through endless grief, the loyalty that bound them like family. One young aide, her hands still gloved from a recent procedure, reached out instinctively toward Lena, a silent offer of support that the girl didn't yet see. The man whirled on Elena, his rage redirecting like a gust through the lobby, knocking over a potted plant in the process. Soil scattered across the floor, dark and damp like spilled blood, the earthy scent cutting through the antiseptic haze. "This ain't your business, lady. That nurse knows where my brother is. She hid him." His accusations tumbled out, fueled by paranoia and whatever demons drove him, his body swaying as if the alcohol still coursed strong in his veins. He feinted toward Maria again, but the staff closed ranks, a human wall of blue and white, their voices overlapping in a chorus of de-escalation. "Sir, please calm down. No one here is hiding anyone. Let us help you." The air grew thicker, charged with the metallic tang of tension, heartbeats sinking in the confined space, Lena's racing, Maria's steadying, the collective pulse of the group rising like a tide. Lena's mind raced, fragments of her past flashing in stark relief, the creak of floorboards under her stepfather's approach, the way her mother's cries had faded into whimpers, the guilt that had propelled her onto rain-slicked streets at midnight. She was no hero, she was just a runaway, overlooked and alone, her body marked by bruises that faded but never healed. Yet here, in this fluorescent-lit arena, she couldn't retreat. Adrenaline masked the tremor in her limbs, but doubt gnawed. What if she made it worse? What if her interference drew this violence back to her own fragile freedom? Determination won out, a quiet fire in her core as she edged sideways, trying to draw the man's focus without escalating further. "Look, just talk to them," she urged, her voice softer now, laced with the empathy born from her own scars. "No one's your enemy here." From the far end of the hall, the thud of boots announced security's arrival. 2 guards pushing through a swelling crowd of staff, radios crackling with static bursts. But the man, cornered and unhinged, lashed out blindly, his fist connecting with a side table, sending magazines fluttering like startled birds. A nurse dodged, her gasp sharp in the air, and the lobby erupted into controlled motion, hands guiding families to safety, voices calling for backup, the rain outside a relentless backdrop to the fray. Elena signaled to the guards, her hand slicing the air with authority, while Maria slipped behind the desk fully, her breath hitching as she felt the baby's reassuring nudge. Lena stood amid it all, small but unyielding, her intervention rippling outward like a stone in still water. The confrontation teetered on a knife's edge, fear and resolve intertwining in the heavy silence between shouts. Whispers spread through the staff. "That girl's brave, and I keep her safe," their misunderstood world of quiet endurance awakening to protect not just one of their own, but this unexpected ally. Lena felt the shift, a tentative warmth piercing her isolation, even as the man's eyes locked on her again, promising retaliation. The hallway beyond began to line with more figures, doctors from upstairs, aides from the wards, their presence a testament to the hidden heart of the hospital, ready to fill every inch with solidarity. In the midst of rising chaos, a deeper truth hovered unspoken. This act would unearth emotional layers none anticipated, forging bonds from the ashes of judgment. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The security guards burst through the swinging doors at the end of the lobby, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum in a cadence that cut through the chaos like a lifeline. The lead guard, a broad-shouldered man named Thomas, with salt and pepper hair cropped close, raised his hands in a placating gesture, his radio clipped to his belt, emitting a low crackle of voices from the control room. The air hummed with urgency now, the fluorescent lights seeming to flicker as shadows danced across the walls from the frantic movements. Rain hammered the windows relentlessly, a grey veil blurring the outside world, while inside the antiseptic scent sharpened, mingling with the faint, metallic tang of overturned metal from the fallen table. Lena's heart raced, a wild staccato in her chest that made her palms slick with sweat, her fingers digging into the fabric of her hoodie as she held her ground between the intruder and Maria. The man spun toward the guards, his eyes wild and bloodshot, chest heaving like a bellows. "Stay back! This is between me and her!" he roared, jabbing a finger toward Maria, who had ducked lower behind the desk, her scrubs rustling softly as she clutched the edge for support. The baby's subtle pressure against her ribs was a quiet anchor amid the storm, but fear coiled tight in her throat, her breaths shallow and measured to conserve strength. She'd dealt with volatile patients before, delirious from pain, raging against diagnoses, but this was unscripted fury, unchecked and aimed at her personally. Whispers of his earlier accusation echoed in her mind. Something about a brother, hidden records, a grudge nursed in the shadows of the city. Exhaustion from the night shift blurred the edges of her thoughts, but adrenaline sharpened her resolve, her hand pressing instinctively to her belly as if to shield the life within from the encroaching darkness. Thomas advanced slowly, his voice low and even, honed from years of diffusing crises in these very halls. "Sir, let's talk this out. No one's getting hurt today." Behind him, the second guard flanked to the side, hand resting near his taser, the faint hum of its charge a subtle threat in the charged air. The lobby had transformed into a pressure cooker. Families herded toward the far corners by aides, their murmurs a low undercurrent like distant thunder. The janitor retreating with his mop bucket rattling softly, monitors beeping erratically from the adjacent bays, as if the hospital itself held its breath. Lena felt the weight of it all pressing down, her legs trembling beneath her slight frame, the cool draft from the doors snaking up her spine and raising gooseflesh on her arms. Guilt twisted in her gut, not for stepping in, but for the fragility of her own escape, the way this confrontation threatened to drag her back into the violence she'd fled. Her stepfather's face flickered in her mind, superimposed over the intruder's snarling features, the memory of bruises blooming like dark flowers on her skin. She wanted to bolt, to melt into the rain-slicked streets outside, but determination rooted her, a quiet rebellion against the silence that had defined her life. The man wasn't listening. With a guttural snarl, he shoved past Thomas, his shoulder connecting with the guard's chest in a dull thud that sent the man staggering back a step. Chaos erupted anew. The second guard lunged, grabbing the intruder's arm, but the man twisted free with surprising force, fueled by desperation and whatever rage simmered beneath. He barreled toward Lena again, his hand outstretched like a claw, fingers splayed to seize her collar. "You little pest! Move!" The words exploded from him, hot breath washing over her face as she dodged sideways, her backpack tangling around her ankle and nearly sending her sprawling. She caught herself against the reception desk, the hard edge biting into her hip, pain flaring sharp and immediate. Adrenaline surged, a bitter rush that tasted of copper on her tongue. Her vision narrowing to the intruder's advancing form, the world reducing to the pounding of her pulse and the slick slide of fear down her back. Maria cried out, a sharp intake of breath that pierced the din, her hand shooting out from behind the desk to steady Lena. "Get away from her!" The nurse's voice cracked with authority, her body half risen now, protective instinct overriding caution. The touch of Maria's fingers on Lena's arm was brief but electric, a spark of connection amid the isolation, warm against the teen's chilled skin. In that instant, Lena glimpsed the exhaustion in Maria's eyes, the faint lines of fatigue etched from sleepless nights tending to strangers, yet softened by an unyielding compassion. The hospital staff surged forward as one, their hierarchy unfolding in seamless motion. Head nurse Elena, directing from the center, her gestures precise like a conductor's, doctors forming a buffer line, their white coats billowing slightly. Aides and orderlies closing the gaps, hands extended not in aggression but in containment. "Clear the path, get the families out," Elena barked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Calloused from countless compressions and sutures, the intruder faltered, surrounded now, his breaths coming in heaving gasps that fogged the air before him. He swung wildly, his fist grazing a doctor's shoulder, eliciting a grunt and a shuffle of feet. But the staff held firm, their presence a wall of quiet strength. Whispers rippled through them. "He's cornered. Don't let him near the girl." Their misunderstood world of clinical detachment giving way to raw loyalty, the kind forged in shared vigils over fading heartbeats. Lena pressed back against the desk, her chest tight with the dual pull of terror and resolve, guilt whispering that her interference had escalated this, drawn the danger closer. But seeing Maria's grateful nod, the subtle nod of the surrounding faces, she felt a flicker of something new, not judgment, but recognition. Her moral core, battered but unbroken, refused to yield, even as the man's eyes locked on her once more, promising retribution in their fevered glare. From the hallway, more footsteps echoed, reinforcements from the upper floors, nurses abandoning their rounds. The soft squeak of wheels from gurneys paused mid-transport. The lobby swelled with their numbers, the air thick with the murmur of voices and the underlying beep of life persisting beyond the fray. Thomas recovered, tackling the intruder from behind in a controlled rush, the two men grappling as the second guard assisted, tasers drawn but held in check. The struggle was brief but intense. Grunts and scuffles, the intruder's curses muffled against the floor as he was subdued, cuffs clicking into place with a finality that echoed like a sigh. Lena slid down the desk side, knees buckling, her breath shuddering out in waves, the photo of her mother still crumpled nearby, a silent witness to her stand. As the guards hauled the man away, his protests fading down the corridor, the staff turned their attention inward. Elena knelt beside Lena, her hand gentle on the girl's shoulder, the touch conveying volumes in its warmth. "You okay, kid?" Maria emerged fully, her face ashen but composed, one hand on her belly as she offered Lena a steadying arm. The hallway beyond began to fill, figures lining the walls in quiet vigil. Doctors, nurses, aides. Their applause soft and restrained, a ripple of solidarity that washed over the space like a balm. Lena looked up, tears blurring the fluorescent haze, her isolation cracking under the weight of their compassion. Fear lingered, adrenaline ebbing into a hollow ache, but determination had carried her through, forging an unexpected bridge in the heart of the hospital's hidden humanity. What none yet voiced was the emotional undercurrent stirring, this teen's courage echoing losses long buried, ready to surface in the quiet that followed. The lobby settled into an uneasy hush as the guards dragged the subdued intruder down the corridor, his muffled curses fading into the distant echo of closing doors. The rain outside had eased to a steady drizzle, tapping irregularly against the windows like hesitant applause, while the fluorescent lights overhead hummed back to life, casting long shadows that softened the edges of the chaos. Scattered magazines lay crumpled on the floor, their pages splayed open like forgotten confessions, and the overturned plant soil clung to the linoleum in dark smudges, releasing a faint, earthy dampness that undercut the pervasive antiseptic sting. Lena remained slumped against the reception desk, her body a coiled spring, unwinding slowly, breaths coming in shallow tremors that rattled her frame. Her hoodie felt heavy now, soaked with the chill of sweat and fear, clinging to her skin like a second layer of doubt. The bruise on her jaw throbbed in rhythm with her pulse, a reminder of the violence she'd mirrored and escaped. But her eyes, wide and glistening, lifted to meet the faces surrounding her. Maria knelt beside her, the nurse's scrubs whispering against the floor, her hand hovering uncertainly before resting lightly on Lena's knee. The warmth of that touch pierced through the girl's isolation, a gentle anchor in the aftermath's disorientation. Maria's face, pale and drawn from the ordeal, held a depth of gratitude that softened the lines of exhaustion etched there from countless shifts. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were deliberate, protective, one arm cradling her belly where the baby stirred faintly, as if awakening to the restored calm. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, her voice soft yet threaded with emotion, the words carrying the weight of someone who knew the cost of standing against the storm. "But thank you, from the bottom of my heart." Her eyes, dark and searching, traced the faint bruise on Lena's jaw, recognition flickering there, not judgment, but a quiet understanding born from the hospital's endless parade of hidden wounds. Head nurse Elena stood nearby, her posture straight despite the subtle sag of fatigue in her shoulders, the faint squeak of her shoes marking her shift as she surveyed the scene. The staff lingered in a loose circle, their numbers swelling as word spread through the halls. Nurses pausing mid-rounds, doctors emerging from consultation rooms, aides wheeling empty carts to a halt. The air felt thicker now, charged not with tension, but with an undercurrent of shared relief, the soft beeps from the monitors resuming their steady cadence like a collective exhale. Whispers circulated among them, low and reverent. "That girl stepped in first. Looked just like..." The fragments trailed off, eyes turning back to Lena with a mix of awe and something deeper, unspoken. To the outside world, the hospital staff were enigmas, efficient shadows in a system of beeps and charts, their toughness a shield against the relentless grind of loss. But here, in this fluorescent-lit sanctuary, their compassion revealed itself in micro-moments. A hand squeezed on a shoulder, a nod exchanged over a patient's chart, the quiet heroism of holding space for the broken. Lena swallowed hard, her throat raw, tasting the faint salt of tears she hadn't realized were falling. She wanted to shrink away, to gather her backpack and slip out into the rain before questions could bind her. Her past was a shadow she carried alone. The stepfather's rages, her mother's fading light, the guilt that gnawed like a persistent ache, whispering that she was too damaged to be seen. I just couldn't watch it happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lights, fingers twisting the hem of her hoodie until the fabric bit into her palms. The crumpled photo of her mother lay nearby, its edges curled from the scuffle, and she reached for it instinctively, the paper cool and fragile against her trembling hand. In that gesture, something shifted in the air, a ripple of recognition that drew Maria's breath to catch. Maria's hand tightened gently on Lena's knee, her eyes welling with a sudden, unguarded emotion. That bruise. "How did you get it?" she asked softly, not probing, but inviting, her own vulnerability mirroring the girl's. Lena hesitated, the words sticking like thorns, but the nurse's gaze held no demand, only the empathy of someone who had pieced together too many stories in these halls. "My stepfather," Lena admitted finally, the confession spilling out in a rush, her voice cracking on the edges. "I ran last night. He always found someone to hurt when he was angry, like her." She nodded toward Maria's belly, the gesture laden with the weight of her unspoken loss. Her mother, taken not by fists alone, but by the slow erosion of spirit under relentless blows. The revelation hung in the quiet, a bridge between them, and Elena's face tightened, her eyes misting as she knelt closer. "My sister," she said, her voice steady but laced with a tremor, the words emerging like a long-held breath. "She was like you, 16, running from a home that wasn't safe. Bruises hidden under long sleeves, eyes that saw too much. We lost her 5 years ago. Overdose, they said, but it was the weight of it all." The head nurse's hand reached out, resting briefly on Lena's shoulder, the touch conveying years of quiet grief forged in these very corridors. Around them, the staff murmured assent, faces reflecting similar shadows, a young doctor nodding, his own loss etched in the furrow of his brow, an aide wiping her eyes, remembering a patient who echoed the girl's quiet strength. Lena reminded them of the ones they'd failed to save, the runaways who slipped through the cracks, their courage overlooked until it was too late, and Maria, the pregnant nurse, vulnerable in her bloom, embodied what they fought for daily. New life emerging from the brink, a symbol of hope amid the beeps and the nights that stretched too long. The emotional truth unfolded like a veil lifting, redefining the lobby's hush into something sacred. Lena's intervention hadn't just halted a threat. It had unearthed buried pains, binding the group in shared humanity. The outside judged them as detached healers, but here, their toughness cracked open to reveal hearts scarred by the same silences Lena knew. Compassion flowed freely now, soft words of thanks, a blanket draped over her shoulders by a passing nurse, the warmth seeping into her chilled bones. Fear lingered in Lena's chest, a quiet echo of her flight, but determination mingled with it, her guilt easing under the weight of their recognition. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, her moral core reflected back in their eyes. The hallway beyond stirred further, figures lining the walls in silent vigil, their presence a testament to redemption through this unexpected community. Maria squeezed her hand, the baby's kick a subtle pulse between them as tears traced silent paths down cheeks worn by vigilance. In this moment, the hospital's hidden heartbeat stronger, weaving Lena into its fold, the rain outside a gentle fade to the deeper truths awakening within. The hallway stretched long and luminous under the unyielding glow of fluorescent panels, a corridor lined with figures standing shoulder to shoulder, nurses in faded blue scrubs, doctors with stethoscopes looped like quiet promises around their necks, aides clutching clipboards as if they were shields. The air hung heavy with the residue of tension, now softened by the faint, lingering scent of rain drifting in from the lobby windows, mingling with the ever-present antiseptic bite that clung to every surface. Soft murmurs wove through the group, not triumphant cheers but a subdued hum of voices, each one carrying the weight of unspoken relief and budding connection. Lena sat on the edge of a vacated chair, the plastic cool against her thighs, her body still humming with the aftershocks of adrenaline. A faint tremor in her fingers, the steady throb of her heartbeat slowing to a weary rhythm. The blanket draped over her shoulders by an anonymous hand felt like a fragile armor, its woolen warmth seeping into her chilled frame, but it couldn't quite dispel the chill of vulnerability that had defined her flight. Maria remained close, her presence a steady anchor, one hand resting on her belly, where the baby's subtle movements resumed, a gentle ripple against the fabric of her scrubs. The nurse's eyes, still rimmed with the shadow of fear, now held a depth of warmth that softened their edges, reflecting the quiet heroism unfolding around them. "You've given us all something today," she said softly, her voice threading through the hush like a lifeline, her fingers brushing Lena's arm in a gesture that spoke of shared fragility. The revelation of moments before lingered in the air, an emotional undercurrent that bound them. Lena's scars mirroring the ghosts the staff carried, the sister lost to silence, the patients who slipped away unseen, the runaways whose courage went unrecognized until echoes like this one surfaced. It redefined the space, turning the clinical sterility into a sanctuary of raw humanity, where judgment dissolved into empathy, and the hospital's misunderstood guardians revealed their compassionate core. Elena stepped forward from the line of staff, her movements deliberate, the faint creak of her shoes echoing softly against the tiled floor. In her hand, she held a small embroidered pin, its silver threading catching the light, a simple hospital crest, worn but polished, symbolizing the quiet rituals of belonging in this world of endless shifts and fragile hopes. It had been Elena's own once, pinned to her scrubs during her first night as head nurse, a token of acceptance into the fold that had sustained her through losses too numerous to count. Now she extended it toward Lena, the metal cool and unyielding in her palm. "This isn't just a pin," she murmured, her voice steady, yet laced with the tremor of memory, eyes locking onto the girl's with an intensity born from years of witnessing quiet redemptions. "It's a promise. Wear it, and you're one of us. Protected. Seen." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. No more running alone, no more fading into shadows. The staff nodded in unison, their faces a mosaic of quiet resolve. The young doctor with his furrowed brow, the aide dabbing at her eyes, Maria's hand squeezing Lena's with maternal insistence. Lena's breath caught, her fingers hesitating before closing around the pin, the edges pressing into her skin like a vow etched in miniature. It was heavier than it looked, carrying the weight of community she had never known, the kind forged not in blood but in shared silences, in the moral conflicts that tested the soul. Tears welled anew, tracing warm paths down her cheeks. But they were not born of fear this time. They were release, the guilt of her past loosening its grip under the gaze of these unlikely allies. She pinned it to her hoodie, the fabric yielding slightly, the crest gleaming against the threadbare grey, like a beacon in fog. Around her, the hallway seemed to expand, the lined figures a human corridor of solidarity, their applause emerging soft and restrained, a ripple of palms meeting, not raucous but profound, echoing the heartbeat of the place. The sound washed over her, a sensory tide, the subtle rustle of scrubs, the distant beep of monitors resuming their vigil, the faint patter of residual rain fading into drizzle outside. For the first time, Lena felt the pull of belonging, her loneliness fracturing like thin ice under spring thaw. As the group began to disperse slowly, returning to their rounds with the weight of the morning etched into their steps, Maria helped Lena to her feet, her arm looping supportively around the girl's waist. "Stay," the nurse urged gently, her breath warm against Lena's ear, the scent of her lavender hand sanitizer, a comforting note amid the clinical haze. "Let us help you find a way forward. No more running into the cold." Protection enveloped her now, not just words but action. Eleanor murmuring about social services with a compassionate edge, a doctor offering a quiet exam for her bruises, aides fetching water and a warm meal from the staff lounge. The hospital, often seen as a cold machine of efficiency, revealed its hidden warmth, the redemption woven through its corridors, where overlooked souls like Lena found unexpected family. Her moral wound, that deep scar of inaction from her mother's final days, began to heal in the micro-reactions around her. A nod of respect, a shared glance heavy with understanding, the quiet heroism of a community that chose compassion over detachment. In the hours that followed, as the sun pierced the grey clouds and cast slanted beams through the windows, Lena sat in a small consultation room, the door closed against the bustle. The pin glinted on her chest, a talisman against the uncertainties ahead. Legal aid for her escape, counselling for the shadows of abuse, a temporary bed in the staff quarters until plans solidified. Maria checked in often, her pregnancy a living symbol of renewal, the two women sharing stories in hushed tones, Lena's guilt over her mother's silence, Maria's fears for her child's world. The staff's intervention had filled not just the hallway, but the voids in Lena's fractured life, their toughness a veil over hearts that beat for the vulnerable. Society's judgments faded here, replaced by the slow-burn truth of human connection, where a runaway's courage ignited quiet miracles. The day waned into evening, the fluorescent hum softening as shifts changed, the rain a distant memory on the pavement outside. Lena stepped into the cooling air at last, but not alone. Maria walked beside her, the pin secure. A bracelet of woven friendship beads slipped onto her wrist by Eleanor as a final token, its threads soft against her skin. The city stretched before them, neon flickering to life. But the isolation that had defined Lena's world felt irrevocably altered. In the quiet heroism of that morning, redemption had bloomed, a testament to compassion's enduring light amid struggle and silence. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of teen escaping abuse saved a pregnant nurse from attack. The hospital filled the hallway for her. See you in the next one. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Lena reach more people who still believe in humanity.